I do want to welcome everyone to the Safe Routes to School Coaching Action Network webinar. My name is Michelle Gully, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. This call is part of a series of webinars developed by America Walks and the National Center for Safe Routes to School. The goal of this presentation is to educate individuals and organizations on topics that may boost the overall success of Safe Routes to School projects across the United States. The National Center for Safe Routes to School and this program have both been made possible by funding from the Federal Highway Administration. So before we get started, I do want to go over a few administrative details. Please note that all of the attendee phone lines are muted. We often have a large number of attendees on these calls, and in order to avoid confusion and cut down on background noise, it's best if we keep the phone lines muted. However, if you do have a question during the webinar, please use the question and answer box on your computer screen, and I'll do the best to read it as it comes in and answer it if I am able. If you cannot access the webinar program at all, but obviously you can hear me, please send me an email at mgully@americawalks.org. That's MGULLEY@americawalks.org. And that email address should also be in the registration that you received, or the notice that you received from GoToMeeting about today's webinar. Once I receive that email, I'll do my best to try and walk you through some steps to get you online with us. Do note, though, that if you can't get online, the webinar is being recorded, so if you do have a big problem, you will have a chance to download it at a later time from www.americawalks.org or www.saferoutesinfo.org. Now, questions pertaining to the subject matter of the presentation may be entered at any time, but we will address those at the end. We try to save about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the program for questions. We do ask that if you have a question about Safe Routes to School that doesn't pertain to today's topic, that you please submit those directly to the National Center for Safe Routes to School via their website. And again, their address is www.saferoutesinfo.org. If you are unable to get all that information down, please don't worry. It will be posted again at the very end of the webinar, and I will also post a slide that contains all of the speaker's contact information as well. So now I'd like to briefly review the agenda. You'll see it should be up on your computer screen at this time. We've already gone over the first point, which is the welcome and administrative details. And next we are going to dive right into our feature presentation, which is Slowing Drivers Down, Why It Matters, and Two Community Solutions. We have three wonderful speakers for you today: Scott Bricker, the Executive Director from America Walks, Elizabeth Stamp, the Director from Walk San Francisco, and Mark Lear, the Projects and Funding Manager from the Department of Transportation in the City of Portland. So with that, we're going to get started. Give me 1 second to turn this over to Scott. Okay, and Scott should have just popped up on your screen. Perfect. Great. And Scott, is your phone still muted? I don't hear you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Happens a lot.
Well, happy to be here. My name is Scott Bricker, and I'm the Executive Director of America Walks. America Walks is a national nonprofit organization, and we're working to make a unified walking movement in America, making America a great place to walk. We have a collaborative approach. Currently, we have over 300 organizational partners, 6,000 individual partners, very strong board of directors, and additional committees, including a steering committee. In 2011, America Walks passed the first federal policy platform for walking. At least we think it's the first ever on the issue of walking. Currently, in the last few years, we've been working most exclusively on funding and trying to maintain dedicated funding for biking and walking, as well as Safe Routes to School programs specifically. But in our federal policy platform, we also state the need for improvement of data collection and models and forecasting to ensure that we understand what's happening in America today around walking, and specifically called out the issue of safety, with safe access for all and low speeds as two priority issues. We have a number of state and local campaigns as well, including this webinar. We have a host of online resources, and we do other webinars on topics as they arise. We have a discussion forum that we partner with an organization with the Alliance for Biking and Walking, and a series of trainings and workshops we run in communities. This summer, we'll also be publishing a new resource called the Walking Action Strategies document, which will be a comprehensive set of walking strategies for American communities. Diving into the topic here of traffic safety, as I mentioned, one of the key areas of interest for America Walks, I think this is very relevant for people who care about the issue of safe routes to schools, children bicycling and walking to school. When I started this work about 15 years ago, the thing that struck me was that from ages 1 to 34, and this has remained relatively constant, traffic crashes are the #1 cause of fatality and the #1 cause of serious injury among this age group, this very broad age group. As we know through reports like Dangerous by Design by Transportation for America, facilities are one of the key aspects to improving safety, so basically safe routes. But specifically, the issue of speed plays directly into that. Statistics like this charts like this show the statistics that the pedestrian survival rate by automobiles driving 20 miles an hour is about 95%, especially of younger children who are a little bouncy compared to older adults. However, when you get to 40 miles an hour, that survival rate drops to 15%. There's been a larger set of body of evidence in European communities where they've done district-wide 20-mile-an-hour zones and showed overall 42% decreases in crash activity, 46% decreases in serious injury and fatal crashes, as well as 62% decrease in crashes for motor vehicle occupants. The point is that by slowing down traffic speeds, provide a safer street and safer community for all. Last year, America Walks did launch a slow speeds initiative, and we've been promoting and discussing the issue ever since. And this issue is important to children. It's important to tourists who are hanging out on the beach in Florida, people who are driving in more rural settings and communities, community-wide campaigns, as well as, of course, the squirrels. In 2012, early 2012, this year, America Walks published 2 papers, white papers, on the issue of slow speeds, and I'm going to go through each one of those very briefly. The first one, why we're stuck at high speed, and what we're going to do about it, defines the issue of speed from an engineering perspective. We discussed the 3 aspects of speed: operating speed, that's the speed at which people actually drive or bicycle or walk, I guess, for that matter. The design speed, which is the speed the road is designed to safely accommodate.
Scott, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we've had a few comments that the audio is cutting in and out a little bit. I don't know if you're on a microphone or speakerphone, but if you can maybe either get a little closer to it or something like that, just to change it up a bit and see if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're
also, actually, is this better? Hopefully.
That does.
I also recently had some interesting dental work, so my speech is slightly slower for the next 2 weeks. It's interesting, but back to the topic. So operating speed and design speed are directly related, and I'll go into that just a touch more. Posted speed is the speed that is actually posted on the street, or the legal speed of that street, and all 3 of these should be in line. However, what we find is that, and what engineers generally believe, is that the design speed is really the most important considering the operating speed. So in both of these images, we don't see a speed limit sign. We don't actually know what the posted speed is. But if you were on the picture in Bend, Oregon, riding your bicycle or walking, if you were driving through there, the operating speed would be significantly different than the picture on the other picture. So in order to get to reasonable speeds, we lay out 4 actions that a community can do. You could reduce the gap between the design speed and the desired operating speed. So if you have a neighborhood community, you could obviously, there are lots of things you could do to employ reduced design speed, like speed bumps, traffic calming measures, other things. You can consider other technical measures, and we talk about the 85th percentile in this report as a measure that engineers use to evaluate the speeds of streets and then setting speed limits or also setting the design of that street. I'm not going to go into detail about the 85th percentile, but just to note that this measure often drives up the speeds of streets, or at least the posted speeds, and may reduce the ability for engineers to reduce or traffic calm that street. We need to change the assumption that a higher design speed actually makes a safer roadway. And a lot of projects in the past have straightened out roads, and then they effectively increase the speed of those roads, and they straighten them out in the beginning for safety reasons, quote unquote. And finally, to reprioritize the community's mobility goals over the automobile mobility goals. And so I think that is critical, of course, for Safe Routes to School programs and the arguments that we put forward for safe streets for children. In our second paper, How Communities Are Slowing Down, we offer 4 general areas that communities could work on, and then a number of great examples that are out there, some international examples as well as plenty of American examples. And we could focus on changing the driver behavior, like the mimes are trying to do here. We could change the actual street, as was done clearly in New York City. We could change the posted speed, and that could have some implications, and other laws that govern posted speed. And so this is the opportunity for me to transition to the speakers that we have, because we have 2 excellent speakers from San Francisco and Portland, Oregon, to talk about the projects they have done in their communities that address, I think, all 4 of these areas. So I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Stamp from Walk San Francisco, and thank you for the opportunity to present.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just getting my screen up, as I think you can see. Okay. I'm Elizabeth Stamp. Can you hear me? Michelle, can you confirm that?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Stamp. I'm the Executive Director of Walk San Francisco. Thank you, Scott, for the great information about speed. So Walk San Francisco and its members, we're a small group, and we work on making San Francisco more safe and more fun for everyone to walk. San Francisco is a wonderful place to walk. We have beautiful views and short distances and mild weather. However, roughly 900 people a year are hit by cars here. That ends up, because of some underreporting that's been documented by the local Department of Health, that ends up being about 3 people a day hit by cars. So Walk San Francisco works to raise awareness about that and about the fact that these crashes are preventable. And one of the big reasons that we see for these crashes, and especially for the severe crashes, are that we have too many city streets running through a very dense, very walkable place that are just like freeways. And that's something that we need to redesign so that we do have those slower design speeds that Scott spoke about. So Walk SF speaks up to reclaim streets as shared public space. Maybe not where everybody can walk down the middle of the street, like in this one photo from an event we had a while back, but basically we're trying to make streets safer for everyone, and to do that, we need to calm traffic. Internationally and nationally, we're seeing an increasing focus on reducing traffic speeds, as Scott said. And the reason, simply put, is that speed kills. This ad is from New York, and it's pretty hard-hitting, and it's about why the speed limit there is 30 miles an hour. And as you'll see, we even think that 30 is too fast. And I want to just pause here for a second and make the point that this was really an important point for us about messaging, and obviously one for New York as well. Having a child pictured in this ad, because we don't want to just say slow down. I mean, especially in New York, probably everyone's in a hurry. And we really need to establish why and kind of change the frame of the issue. And the reason is that this can and will save kids' lives, and we saw that as the most effective way to frame the issue. Here's another image that I love from Sweden that's a different way to look at the danger posed by streets with fast traffic. Again, as New York was saying, 30 is better than 40, but 20 is a lot better than 30. This picture is actually about the dangers of 30 mile an hour roads. And here in San Francisco, about a year ago, the Centers for Disease Control came out, and together with our public health departments, they reviewed the literature on speed, and they found that you're 6 times more likely to be killed if you're hit by a car going 30 miles an hour than 20 miles an hour. And that's why we want to deal with speed. I think this is also an important point. Many people blame pedestrians for getting hit. You know, sometimes I'm on radio shows and people call up and say, pedestrians act crazy, or especially in San Francisco, pedestrians just act crazy. And I think this picture and this general framing clarifies the issue, the fact that you can improve the conditions for everyone. You can take away these chasms that are endangering everybody, especially that little kid in the orange cap in the corner. You know, seniors can't see as well or move as fast as they once did. Some people are mentally ill right here on the corner where my office is. That's a problem. Some people are blind, and some people, especially kids, aren't developmentally able to always be safe on the street. And none of these people should die. So again, for us, the most effective approach was to frame the issue around improving the conditions to keep kids safe. Our campaign for citywide school zones started when we worked with parents at this school, Sunnyside School, who were concerned about a big, fast street in their neighborhood, which has 3 schools on either side of it. And they had found out about the law, the state law, Assembly Bill 321 here in California. What Assembly Bill 321 does, it was passed in 2008, and it enables cities and counties to create 15-mile-an-hour zones for 500 feet around all schools. It also allows create 25-mile-per-hour zones, which are sort of the usual speed for the distance from 500 to 1,000 feet from schools. For us here, that was less relevant, as in San Francisco, 25 miles an hour is actually the default speed limit, so we didn't really focus on that part. One other caveat, and it's an important one on this, is that it's only allowed on 2-lane roads. So roads that are any bigger than 2 lanes can't get these 15-mile-an-hour speed limits, at least not yet. Another point I'll make, Scott mentioned the 85th percentile speed rule. That's something that says that they can't make the speed limit any lower than what the 85th percentile of drivers are driving. It's circular and it's frustrating because basically it says you can't set the speed limit lower than what people are already driving. So it really makes streets stick to that design speed rather than changing it by lowering the posted speed. I apologize if that's a little complicated. Don't worry about it. But the important thing here is that school zones are an exception to the 85th percentile rule. So as you saw in the earlier slide, we raised attention in the media on pedestrian safety. That was a lot of our strategy and continues to be. And raising attention to the fact that so many people get hit by cars here, and nobody knows until they learn. And Mayor Newsom, we think in response to some of this pressure from the media and from advocates, Walk SF and others, right before he left his post as mayor, he issued an executive directive on pedestrian safety, and it sets goals to reduce serious and fatal pedestrian injuries by half in 10 years, and actually by a quarter in 5 years. We helped to draft that, and we made sure it included school zones. And it was interesting, as we started to draft this directive, we got a lot of pushback from the municipal transportation agency. They eventually agreed, but they were kind of alarmed. And the reason is, here's a map of where all of the city's schools are. There are about 200. And they were rather overwhelmed. AB 321 allows you to put up 15-mile-an-hour school zones around all schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, public and private. And the law actually was started in a small town called Goleta. And I found out somewhat later that Goleta has these, called them up and said, how many do you have, how many schools have these school zones? And they said, 4. So when we started, we didn't quite realize the scale of the change we were proposing, but MTA did, and so they pushed back a little bit, but eventually we got through that. And as you can see, even though the zones are small, it's really covering a lot of the city, and our goal really was to change the way streets are viewed and who they're for and what they're for, and do this citywide. So the process to get these speed zones was both fast and slow by turns. It took about a summer last summer, to approve all of the new school speed zones. They did 2 big bunches of them, and there wasn't much opposition, except at first the other transportation agency we have here, the one that funds the first one, said, no, it's too expensive, we're not sure that's a good use of taxpayer money. Well, fortunately, they said that in a rather public forum, and we were able to say, you've got to be kidding, because it costs about $350,000 to basically put up all these signs, make and put up all the signs. That is about the same as what putting up one traffic light costs here in San Francisco. So we were able to make the case that this was a citywide change that was really quite a big bang for the buck, and we moved beyond that particular argument. Another glitch that we had, MTA has to put up notices everywhere they do this, and so they'll put up a sheet of paper that says, we're changing the speed limit, we're going to have a hearing, and it's a piece of paper stuck to a pole with plastic wrap. Well, there were so many school zones that MTA actually ran out of plastic wrap, and that was why they had to do it in 2 bunches instead of just having all 200 go to one hearing. We really put on a lot of pressure to get the first sign up the first week of school with an event with the mayor. And this was interesting because apparently they didn't have any 15-mile-an-hour signs. So it took a while. Part of the delay was just making a whole lot of 15-mile-an-hour signs because that speed was so uncommon until now. And so, but it was really important, at least to me, to make sure that we got these up the first week of school so that we could get media attention around back to school and really get the word out to people that they have to slow down, because if you don't do that, it's not going to be effective. So if you look closely at this picture, you might see that the one is a little funny looking, and that's because it's a sticker. There's a one sticker over the 2 and a 25-mile-an-hour. But we got it up there, and I'm just pointing out this is at the same event when we're announcing the new speed zones, and that's me talking, but the important thing here is that the police chief was there, and really having police enforcement was an important part of this. And part of the lead up to all of this was we've been working on a task force set up by the mayor's executive directive, and it's been a way to really work well with the police and with MTA and the Department of Public Health and all other agencies that touch the streets, and there are arguably way too many of them here. And the police, being part of this process, put together with MTA and with WAC SF the first ever really clear enforcement plan, systematic enforcement plan. So they go out to every school, MTA goes out, puts up a bunch of signs, lets the police know where those signs went up. The police go out and give warnings at those signs at those schools about the new speed, and then a month later they go out again and they ticket. As far as we know, they've never done such systematic enforcement of something like this, and that's been a good step forward because, of course, if you don't have enforcement, it's not nearly as effective. Then in October for Walk to School Day, we put up signs at this school where we did Walk to School Day, and we included more information about the 15-mile-an-hour speed zones in the press release so that we could continue to get the word out. The mayor came to this event as well, and it was the first time a mayor had participated in Walk to School Day for many years. And he really had a great time, and I think both of these events really reinforced his commitment to the issue, because this really got to see how important it is to keep these kids safe, how much fun they have when they're walking, how conditions are not necessarily ideal around schools. And I think by kind of enabling him to participate in these and take leadership on these, it really helped to get the mayor out in front on keeping people safe throughout the city. This slide is just the same day. I just have to show it because it was such a big walk to school day, the biggest one the city's ever had. And this particular school, it was great because we had what I thought of as kiddical maps. There were so many kids that they took over both sides of an intersection at 16th and Mission in San Francisco, which is a pretty busy intersection. And all the cars stopped, and nobody minded. So just last month, all the school zones finally were established. The total was 181. There were some schools that weren't covered, which is unfortunate. They didn't qualify for AB 321. But 181 school zones was a pretty big step forward for San Francisco, all going up between August and May. And then a few more are still going up as more parents request them. And again, for us, this is a great step forward to redefine who and what streets are for. They're for people. They're for kids. It was a little bit of a challenge to actually get MTA to publicize and celebrate what is really a big success. And again, it's important that people know about these speed zones or else they won't follow them. So we'll publicize this more at this year's Walk to School Day in October. Another challenge that we had, the mayor's executive directive on pedestrian safety, as I mentioned, created a task force. And one of the products of the task force was this map. And this shows the worst streets in the city. The 5% of streets where over half of all of the injuries occur, including all of the serious and fatal injuries to pedestrians. These are mostly arterial streets, big, wide, fast streets. And this is really where Walk SF is now focused on fixing these first. Unfortunately, AB 321 doesn't allow us to fix arterials like this big street. This is Broadway with a school zone. It's way more than 2 lanes. It doesn't have any kind of useful median. It's signed for 40 miles an hour, but cars go much faster. There was one recently clocked going over 80 in this tunnel. Seniors cross here all the time. There's a preschool on the left side and a school on the right, but we can't make it any slower using this particular tool. So we need more tools. We are piloting arterial traffic calming in San Francisco. And another outcome of the school zones is that parents are demanding safer streets for their kids on these kinds of bigger streets because now they know it's possible, and they're saying, hey, that school got it. How come my school can't? Oh, well, if it can't have a school zone, what can you do to make it better? So we're really getting across that you can change the streets and make the conditions safer. But I just want to speculate on, what's next. Maybe senior zones. New York City has senior zones. San Francisco has a very large senior population, and so that would be very appropriate here. Park zones. I found this little story about a place in, I'm forgetting now, in Illinois. And that's obviously a great idea because, kids and seniors are some of the biggest users of parks. And then here's our ultimate goal, to really take over the streets as shared, pleasant space for people to enjoy. This is from Sunday Street, San Francisco's monthly car-free street. So thanks very much for listening. If there are questions later, maybe I'll have answers. And now I'll turn it over to Mark Lear. Thanks.
Hi, this is, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth and Scott. I'm really excited to be part of this panel. My name is Mark Lear. I manage the projects and funding group for the Portland Bureau of Transportation. And my goal of this presentation is to give you a quick update on how we have recently changed state law in Oregon to help us with our Safe Routes to School efforts. And in the presentation, I'm going to try to, as much as possible, talk about what I think was the keys to our success, and also and with some frequently asked questions that I think you'll hear if you pursue an effort similar to what we've done. Portland's effort in improving traffic safety or transportation safety really started in our most recent efforts about a decade ago with the formation of a community school and traffic safety partnership. It's a broad-based group, health providers, multimodal advocates, trucking interests, that has worked on two primary goals. The first one I think is probably in everybody's safety plan, which is reducing injuries and fatalities. But the second one, which has been a big part of what we've done, especially around our Safe Routes to School, has been reducing the number of people that are limiting walking and biking due to traffic safety concerns. So, if we do this polling work, the numbers haven't changed that much over the last 10 years. We still find up to 2/3 of Portlanders limiting walking and biking due to their fears about traffic. And with Safe Routes to School, that number oftentimes is even higher than that. Probably the single biggest funding accomplishment that we've had with our program has served us really well is in 2004, Portland City Council dedicated an increase in traffic fine revenue to our traffic safety program, a traffic safety account. And we use the Community School Traffic Safety Partnership to annually prioritize how to spend those resources. And we focus them in three areas: reducing driver errors, pedestrian and bike safety, and Safe Routes to School. Those efforts have, we think, provided a number of successes. The two that I've highlighted here are that in 2006, we had less than 10 schools in our Safe Routes to School program. Today we have over 80 schools that are participating. So, in a 6-year period, we've dramatically increased our ability to do that engineering, enforcement, education work, mapping work, all that stuff in our schools. And then the other piece, and it's all really tied together, is that over that same period of time, we've increased the number of Portland residents, businesses that are within a half mile of the neighborhood greenway in our city from less than 30% to over 60%. So in Portland, we've changed our way of talking about these low-volume, low-speed streets from what's traditionally been called a bike boulevard to a neighborhood greenway. And part of the reason that we've done that is we just consistently hear from parents and residents and businesses that the bike boulevard, the traditional bike boulevard, is serving pedestrians, in a lot of ways, as well as it's serving bicyclists. And we've just done a lot with street trees and stormwater features to also really enhance the greenness of our neighborhood greenways. The problem that we had before we had House Bill 3150 was a problem that without the 20-mile-per-hour posting, we just weren't able to, develop streets that could perform, as Scott talked about and Elizabeth talked about, in as safe a manner as we would like them to. And even more importantly, it's there just is this big difference in a street that has motor vehicles traveling, closer to 25 than 20 miles per hour. As someone said in one of our public meetings, it's like the difference between a street and a really wide bicycle and pedestrian path. When you get speeds down to closer to 20 than closer, to 25, the amount of passing that we see that causes stress to bicyclists, causes stress to pedestrians that are walking in the road, it just diminishes significantly between the 25 and 20 miles per hour. So in addition to just those overall safety benefits, there are just some real qualitative, I think quantitative too, comfort factors that we see with the speed change. Again, prior to the change in our legislation, we had 20 mile per hour is applied 24/7 in business zones, and we could apply them with some pretty limited times in our school zones. Again, when children are present, in a lot of places, is a fair amount of ambiguity, and so the ability to have a more consistent speed was something that we really wanted to be able to do. Again, the specifics of why that ends up being a problem, really there's two that we experienced. The first was when it comes to enforcement, in our city at least, for photo radar, which is the bulk of enforcement that we do on these kinds of facilities, our traditional practice between police and judges was that we wouldn't write a ticket until a driver was 11 miles an hour over the speed limit. So in that case, you had these streets that were the backbones of our safe routes to school routes or connectivity between our neighborhoods, that we weren't able to write people tickets until they were going 36 miles an hour on a street that we knew would function better at 20 miles per hour. In addition, and I'll talk about this in quite a bit more detail, but we've really used speed bumps aggressively. Speed humps, I guess, would be the way they're described in a lot of places. This is a 14-foot bump as you're driving it over it with about 3.5 inches of rise. And we've used those aggressively on almost every Safe Routes to School project or neighborhood greenway project to bring down the speed to an 85th percentile speed of 25 miles an hour. And we wanted to continue that to 20 miles per hour, but we need the legislative change to be able to do that. So with House Bill 3150, we were granted that authority. What it can apply, local governments can make this change without any approval from the state, which is a big deal for us here in Oregon, if the street meets the following conditions. First, it has to be a local street. That's basically, in our state law, means it's basically in a residential district. 70% of our streets fall into this category. Second, the volume on the street, the volume of motor vehicles needs to be 2,000, basically less than 2,001 cars per day. The 85th percentile speed on the street has to be less than 30 miles per hour. The street needs to be signed and marked to indicate bike and pedestrian use. So that Sharrow that you can see in the picture on this slide is the primary way that we're identifying these neighborhood greenways. In addition, there'll be 20-mile-per-hour signs that are required, as well as additional bike and signage, destination signing in the corridor. And then there has to be an ordinance that's passed by the local road authority to do this, but you don't have to go through the state to make these changes. From my perspective, if I pointed to one thing that was the most important factor that we had in our ability to make this change, it was the partnership that we had between the AAA of Oregon, the Oregon chapter of the Automobile Association of America, and the Oregon Trucking Association. So the slide I have here has some posters that we used at a Street Smart Go Safe event that were basically showing how, again, we're all in this together. The president of or the government relations person for the American Automobile Association, Bree Dodds, had a sign that said, "I walk my dog to the park." Oregon Trucking Association president had a sign, I said, "Ride my bike for fun," and Steph Routh with the Land Pedestrian Coalition had that great sign, "I love avocados delivered by truck." I can't value how important that partnership is and how much work we've put into it. In developing our bike plan, we heard really strongly from truck and freight interests and from groups like the AAA that they were really interested in reducing conflicts between bikes and pedestrians on our busiest streets. And although that's a complicated issue, and we're always going to have needs for improving safety in those areas, and we have a high crash corridor program that's focused on that, we agreed that developing a network of parallel, low-volume, low-stress neighborhood greenways was one way of meeting that shared objective. As a result of that, the AAA and the Oregon Trucking Association used their contacts in the legislature to help us move this legislation. It was extremely helpful. The other piece I think that really helped us with this legislative effort was the application of the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit is on relatively low speed and low volume facilities. From my perspective, I think over time the volume issue may be something that we continue wanting to evaluate. I feel strongly that if you're not willing to traffic calm a street to bring down the 85th percentile speed, meaning 85% of cars going that speed or slower, to below 30, that from my perspective, it's of limited value to mark the street as 20 miles per hour. Others may disagree with that. I just think that burden of actually doing the traffic calming before you mark that lower speed is, I think adds value for the overall policy. In addition, we had very strong support from groups like the Bicycle Transportation Alliance, Land Pedestrian Coalition, health groups, and neighborhood advocates that was very useful. And then the last thing that I'd highlight is I think across the board, at least in Oregon's legislature, anything you can do to drive the decision-making authority for how we control our streets to the local level, local governments, and especially if you tie it to the local elected officials as well, is something I think resonates well in the legislature. And so that was a key part, that ability for not just giving the authority to the road authority, but having the local electeds be a part of that decision-making process was something that that we got a lot of positive feedback from the legislature. Sorry, I'm having there we go. So now I've just got 5 quick frequently asked questions that we often hear related to this effort. The first one is, will changing the speed limit really change the speed of vehicles? I think the answer, in some cases could be yes and no. I mean, if all you do is put up the speed sign and you do nothing else, as you heard earlier from Elizabeth, the need for enforcement and other sort of things. In Portland, again, we've taken this approach that we're going to ensure these lower speeds on these important facilities, with our major tool being the speed bump, speed hump. On a 25-mile-an-hour facility, our spacing requirement in the past was 400 to 450 feet. That ensured it at 85% of vehicles were going 25 miles an hour or less. If we change that spacing to somewhere between 330 to 380 feet, same speed hump, we'll bring down 85% of vehicles to 20 miles per hour or less. And it's a relatively small increment in the overall cost of the project. If you assume or with our numbers, a street with 25 mile per hour speed designation would have 12 speed bumps per mile. That's about $24,000 for us. Our speed bumps are about $2,000 a bump. If we want to control the speed to 20 miles per hour, we have 15 speed bumps per mile, so it's 3 additional speed bumps per mile, and closer to $30,000 per mile to achieve that lower speed. Another question we often hear is, why invest resources on a street that is already pretty low speed, low volume, and safe? The reason for that, and again, this slide is trying to highlight before and after from 2002 to 2009. You can see basically in the north part of Portland, really all we had were bike lanes on busy streets as what was primarily our network. What we've done in the last few years is, and you can see them with the thicker lines on the lower slide, is we've added 45 plus new miles of neighborhood greenways, and it's basically that network that's serving in the same way a transit network does all those houses, businesses, schools, is really, from our perspective, why there's added value and really highlighting what are already safe places but need investments in additional speed reduction, and especially most of the money is spent on crossing improvements to improve safety. Third question we hear a lot is, will creating a network of traffic calm streets, especially if you're using speed humps, come at a cost of reductions in emergency response times? Again, our answer here in Portland is no. We work really aggressively with our fire bureau to have a network of emergency response routes that works really well for them. And we don't do traffic calming on those kinds of facilities, or we don't do traffic calming that slows emergency vehicles. We're continuing to look at more fire-friendly types of traffic calming for those types of settings. Fourth question that we get a lot is, will these additional speed bumps make these routes less attractive to bicyclists? This is a fair question, and we've continued to evaluate every project as it rolls forward, but our feedback that we've gotten has been the opposite. There's been extensive research, including GPS studies done in the city of Portland, that show that Portlanders will go out of their way to ride on a traffic calm facility. As you can see in this picture with the school kids and the bike trains that are occurring all over our city, these facilities really have become, in a sense, a trail network. And that slower speed, there is some impact of riding over a speed bump, but the benefits of the slower speed, we hear just consistently that bicyclists appreciate that additional traffic calming. And then the last frequently asked question that we often hear is, with limited resources, how can governments afford to build these types of projects? So first of all, from my perspective, I don't think there is much out there as far as what you can do to support safe routes to school that's more cost-effective than building these kinds of networks. For the 45 miles of facilities that we've built over the last 3 years, our average cost is about $140,000 per mile. We have sidewalk projects in our city that can be as expensive as $16 to $18 million a mile for sidewalk work when the drainage and other things aren't where they need to be. Obviously, building trails, traditional trail projects is in the multi-million dollars a mile in most urban settings as well. And then the last thing that's really become a real positive piece as far as our maintenance and overall cost perspective is we are, because of limited resources in Portland, like a lot of cities, limiting our maintenance dollars to our busiest streets and our most important streets for pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. So by identifying a small subset of our street network for these types of facilities, it allows us to also prioritize our maintenance dollars as well. And the last slide I wanted to show really highlights that this strategy is working for us. Obviously, the lower speed traffic calming of neighborhood greenways is just one element of it. But what this slide shows is with our survey work that we do, these are the mail home surveys as part of the Safe Routes to School program, we've seen a 31% increase in active transportation. Again, now in Portland, thankfully, walking and biking to school is the preferred way to get to school, and this speed reduction strategy is a key element of that effort. Thanks for the opportunity to describe our program.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mark and Elizabeth and Scott. That was a wonderful presentation. Give me one moment here. I will put up everyone's contact information so that they can get that down while we are answering some questions. And Scott, why don't I start, or actually we'll start with Mark, and actually I think this one might be for Mark and Elizabeth. One person was asking, how many school districts are there in the Portland CSTSP service area? And also, Elizabeth, if you could talk about San Francisco as well, that'd be great.
In Portland, I think the answer is 6. There's 2 districts that cover about 80-90% of the city, and then there's a couple that have smaller little pieces.
Okay. And Elizabeth, what about in San Francisco?
The question was how many schools are here?
School districts.
School districts. Oh, I think it's all one school district. Or it is all one school district.
Interesting. Okay, and I think this also might be more for you, Elizabeth, but again, either Scott or Mark, please feel free to chime in, and that goes for all these questions, regardless of who I throw it at. If you have something to add, please feel free to jump in. The question is, could San Francisco, or in your opinion, Elizabeth, do you think Walk San Francisco could have done this without the change in state law?
No. It's an easy question and a simple answer.
I know.
No, it was really important. Well, okay, I should qualify it because I think Goleta actually did it before. And the folks in Goleta who did it led the effort to get the state law passed. But I've actually found it somewhat, so I think it is possible without the state law. I think the state law makes it and made it a lot easier, and I've actually been surprised, and many other people have been surprised, the folks who got the state law passed, that not more cities and counties have done this. So even with the state law, it seems like there's a barrier. There just needs to be kind of a champion to carry it forward and make it happen. But I think that since Goleta did do it before the state law was passed, it is possible.
But it obviously makes it much easier having that behind you, the statute behind you. Okay, great. Let's see. Got a bunch of questions here for you, Elizabeth. And actually this one, a few people asked, and they were interested to know more about kind of the interpretation of when children are present. Is it, only during school hours, or, is that, or what they're wondering, is that the speed of the road most of the time or just some of the time?
Yeah, and this is one of those things that can be somewhat broadly interpreted. So if you have sort of a police department and transportation departments that really want to make the streets safe. Here kids can be on the street at any time of day or in the evening. So I think that's really the way it's interpreted. You'll notice, or maybe you won't, but anyway, the signs just say when children are present. They don't say, during pickup and drop-off times. And in fact, what we hear from parents is that the speeds on the street are in general slower then because, of course, there's congestion. And so making sure that these speed limits are in effect and are being enforced at other times of the day as well is important. I also personally sort of have the theory that if you're driving and you see a big number with some little text below it, I at least rarely sort of, think about, well, let's see, what day is this? What time is this? Do I have to slow down or not? I just sort of react to the number. So, but yeah, I think there is some discretion about what the time is, and I think here it's being interpreted broadly, but it is kind of up to interpretation.
Okay, great. So let's see, and this is one, I'm going to try and summarize, well, I'll ask a specific question, but a lot of folks have actually inquired more to find out more information about this, but someone from San Francisco is writing in and saying that the city DPW told them that the 85% did count for school zones in 15-mile-per-hour zones, and that they still have to do a speed survey. They're asking whether or not you know if that's true, and then also quite a few people have, and I know you mentioned that it was complicated, but have asked some questions around this 85th percentile, and whether you could elaborate on that. And Mark, I know you talked about it, and Scott, you talked about it as well, so if there's anything you want to add, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, the city does a speed survey citywide every few years, and so they were able to just do that. My understanding is that the 85th percentile rule doesn't apply to this because, fairly explicitly, and so DPW may just be wrong. But I think they do have to do surveys. I have to check on that. I'm actually working on writing up some sort of case study materials on this with the California Department of Public Health to hopefully make it easier for other communities to do this. So I guess I'll ask whoever has that question to maybe shoot me an email, and I can get them more information when we've got that together, and hopefully that'll be useful. And then yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the one thing I was going to add on the 85th percentile is I think what people have found most offensive about the use of 85th percentile is if what you do is you say drivers in general know what the safe speed to drive is, we'll use that 85th percentile speed to set the speed limit. We don't do that. The way we use the 85th percentile speed, and I'm supportive of this, and I think it makes sense, is that we say the 85th percentile speed, you can't post a speed that's more than 10 miles an hour slower than the 85th percentile speed. And the reason, is obviously as you get higher levels of, variance or differences between what the speeds on the street are, that it starts to lead to operational issues. And that resonates with me. Again, I also think that as the road authority, you need to do some things to actually, not have that situation where you have this big range in the speed of vehicles. So in our case, it's, the 85th percentile speed is useful in the sense that we're saying, we want to reduce the speed of vehicles below the posted speed limit for 85% of vehicles. On some of our busier streets, we also have a raw number so that we're looking at that 15% of how many vehicles that is. But anyway, that's in general kind of how it's being used, how we're using the 85th percentile speed in Portland.
Okay, great. And Scott, did you want to add anything to that? Oh, do we still have you on the line, Scott?
This is Elizabeth. I could just mention that my understanding of the reason that law or that rule exists is to kind of prevent speed traps.
Yeah.
But I think many of us feel that it's kind of gone too far the other way and now prevents safe speeds.
Yeah, and I agree that definitely where people use it to set the speed limit and say the speed limit can't be any lower than the 85th percentile, that's a pretty archaic way to be establishing speeds.
Sure. Okay, let's see. We'll move on to the next question here. I think we may have lost Scott. Scott, do we still have you on the line?
Yeah, I somehow got dropped, but I am here again.
Okay, great. I was just checking in. Let's see. This one, I guess, would be for you, Elizabeth. And the question is, how does Bill 321 fall within the MUTCD guidelines for school speed?
I'm not sure.
That's a fair answer.
Sure how that works. But there's a new update of the MUTCD, the manual, and it's been written quite a while since that state bill was passed. So I believe it incorporates that.
Okay, moving on to our next question. One person actually sent this in before the webinar, and they wanted to know any information that you could provide that would help or could be woven into about how relationships with police were built or strengthened in each of the projects that you were working on.
So let's see. To start with, it took a while. We had a lot of if you go back like 15 years in Portland when critical mass was really big here, the bike community and police and even transportation were in a pretty adversarial position. We brought in our community school and traffic safety partnership in the early years, about 10 years ago, we identified this as an issue between police, transportation, and the ped and bike communities. We brought in some trainers, Peter Fluke, I think from Florida, an ex-police officer that's done a lot of training about how to do better enforcement around ped and bike issues. I think that was positive. Our city council passed an ordinance, you could Google this, but it's on a community policing agreement where we basically got an agreement between all the different parties that said, we're going to drive our decision-making based on crash history and best practices, and has a process where annually we sort of meet or actually quarterly we meet and review our progress against those goals. But a lot of it's just been just rolling up our sleeves and working together on projects and listening to, what the different challenges are. But I think right now our police bureau feels really strongly that we're helping them do their work. That includes like calls that used to go to them for police dispatch now go through our traffic safety livability hotline, and we add some value, I think, and make their lives a little bit easier on how we, talk to the public and follow up. And so there's just a whole bunch of things like that we've done.
Great.
I think that's been true
Sure.
too. I know in Goleta that having the partnership with the police was really kind of the foundational thing, and actually the police captain, I think, who took it on ended up drafting the state law. So he had been a bit of an opponent at the beginning, so it was a big turnaround. Here, just sort of getting together in a group, probably similar to Mark's experience, to work with the police on figuring out how we can make streets safer, taking away the frame around bicyclists, which gets really blamey sometimes, and just talking about how can we keep our kids safe, made it simpler. And honestly, for us, the events with all the kids, I mean, everybody just leaves kind of on a high from that. You just grin all day after walk to school day, and I think that really helps to have the police and city leaders feeling like they're being appreciated. And then we've also been working on, for example, getting the police funding to get electronic citation devices. So as Mark said, their lives are easier, and we have better data on what's actually happening out there. So it is kind of a long process, but important.
Thanks.
Well, I was going to add, and for disclosure, I'm from Portland as well. I live in Portland. That, Mark, when you guys formed the Community Traffic Safety Partnership and that funding came down, you said there was a third, and a third. Didn't some of that money go directly to the police department as well for some of their operations, so it helped build some support for passage of the program overall when you had different bureaus working together to dedicate that money for traffic safety, and they got some and the Safe Routes got some?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Scott. We definitely appreciated your help in moving that effort forward. But in the reducing driver error category of our partnership, most of that money goes toward supporting our automated enforcement programs, red light cameras, and photo radar. We're definitely really interested in pursuing additional fixed camera technologies, speed enforcement technologies, again, especially because of that, what I think is this really big issue out there is how do you do traffic calming on the busier streets? And fixed speed cameras is something that we're really interested in, or we're doing work on now.
Great. Okay, so we'll throw one more question. So go ahead,
I actually think one more, I didn't realize it was going to be one more question. I just wanted to note that I know it was emailed out that the papers, I didn't mention during my presentation that our papers are available on americawalks.org, right on the front page under featured. And there are a number of other case studies that are, so both the San Francisco and Portland case study are written up, obviously not to the detail we heard today, so it was awesome to hear that. But there are other case studies and the ideas that are on there about how communities can reduce speed.
Okay, and I guess I'll stick with it since I promised one more question. I'll throw one more out there. I think this is a good one to close on, that all three of you may have something to add. One person was just wondering whether or not the three of you have any recommendations for small advocacy groups looking for ways to better interact with local and state governments. Any just little kind of last-minute tips that you can give folks? You know, Mark, you're coming from government, and Scott and Elizabeth both coming from kind of the nonprofit end.
Well, Walk SF is certainly a small nonprofit, and for us, really, the use of the media and kind of both to build pressure on local governments and then also to kind of build support and congratulations for them for taking these actions has been important and, you know, is fairly low cost and low investment.
I think that's a great tip.
This is Mark. The other one that I'd add, and I'm really impressed with the stuff that San Francisco is doing. That's great with their 15-mile-an-hour school zones. But the one I would highlight is police work is super hard. And like you said, you know, being able to go to a Safe Routes event and those miles that you get from that activity, the more that we can sort of share some of the positive parts of our traffic safety work and how important it is to people, to those police officers that have hard jobs. From my experience, that's been one of the most effective things, and you know, the ability to get them to take on new work as they start to see some more props for the work they're doing now has been probably one of the most significant things.
Sure.
One of the things I want to add, Scott, is especially in working between the state and local, which I heard in the question, it's helpful if you have many communities have more, you know, local jurisdictions are more supportive of some of these measures than say the state. DOTs may be, but if you have like-minded people, engineers talking to engineers, planners talking to planners, police officers talking to, you know, police officers in different jurisdictions, or as Mark mentioned, electeds talking to electeds, I think having people share those stories and experiences with others who might not understand their agencies don't focus on those, and how having, say, local control for transportation decision-making is important, and trying to couch it in a way that supports the mindset of the people you're talking to, I think, is really important.
Great. Well, I want to thank all three of our speakers again, Elizabeth, Mark, and Scott. It was a wonderful presentation. And everyone, if you'll notice, I did post the name of our next webinar up on the screen. It's actually going to be 2 weeks from now. We're starting something new between now and October. We're going to be doing 2 webinars a month. Our next is going to be on June 28th, and it's called A Global Perspective, Lessons from International Safe Routes to School Programs. You can register either at the National Center for Safe Routes to School website or the America Walks website. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we'll have you online with us 2 weeks from now. So thanks again, guys.